The ink dried before she had the chance to second-guess it. Sophia sat in the marble lobby of Caldwell & Locke, the city's most prestigious law firm, her fingers still trembling slightly as she set the pen down. She glanced at the paper in front of her. Surrogacy agreement. Confidential and irrevocable. The terms were clear. No contact beyond what was necessary. No expectations. No emotional entanglements. Just a transaction. The room was cold. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Even the air seemed sterilized, the kind of place where hearts were left at the door. Across from her, a man in a navy suit sat in silence, his face unreadable. He didn't look at her, not even once, but she knew who he was. Nathaniel Crane, one of the wealthiest men in the country, CEO of a tech empire, philanthropist in headlines, ghost in real life. Rumors followed him like shadows about his past, his losses, the coldness he wore like a second skin. He had chosen her. Not because of who she was, but because of what she could give. Sophia wasn't naive. She knew desperation showed. Her waitress uniform, her medical bills piling up at home, her little brother waiting on a transplant list. Those weren't secrets. They were reasons, and this agreement, it promised enough to change all of that. Nathaniel finally rose, nodding at his legal team before turning to leave. Still no words, still no acknowledgement. But as he passed her, his eyes flicked toward hers. Just for a moment, and in that sliver of silence, something strange flickered between them. Not warmth, not yet, but not nothing. Sophia stood slowly, clutching her copy of the agreement. She didn't know what she'd just stepped into, only that it had begun. The car that came for her the next morning wasn't just a ride, it was a message. Jet black, silent as fog, and driven by a man in a tailored uniform who addressed her only as Miss Reyes. Sophia didn't ask questions. She simply held the folder tighter against her chest and slid into the back seat, where leather seats smelled faintly of cedar and money. The city melted away quickly, giving rise to winding roads lined with trees that looked sculpted by design. When the gates opened, she realized she wasn't entering a home, she was entering a fortress. The Crane estate sprawled like a private kingdom. High walls, ivy-covered stone, glass that reflected the sky. It was beautiful, yes, but distant. A place where emotions were not just buried, but forbidden to bloom. Inside, she was greeted not by Nathaniel, but by a housekeeper named Miriam. Kind eyes, quiet voice. She showed Sophia to her room on the east wing, light-filled, spacious, almost too generous. "It's yours for the next 9 months," Miriam said. "He prefers order. Breakfast at 7, doctor visits on Tuesdays. You'll find the schedule on the nightstand." Sophia nodded, though the air felt too thick to breathe. She wandered the space later, barefoot on cold marble, fingers trailing along grand piano keys she didn't dare press. Portraits hung on the walls, men with stoic faces, women in pearls, all staring down as if weighing her worth. Still no sign of him, just his presence like a silent current running through every hallway. As night fell, Sophia sat by the tall window in her room, watching the lights flicker across the grounds. This wasn't a beginning filled with warmth. It was structure. Isolation, but she reminded herself of the reason. This was survival, for now. Tuesday arrived quietly, as if the house itself respected the schedule. At exactly 8 o'clock, a sleek black SUV waited at the base of the estate steps. Sophia climbed in without a word. Miriam handed her a sealed folder with her medical file and a thermos of warm ginger tea. "For the nausea," she offered gently. Still no Nathaniel. The private clinic resembled a spa more than a medical facility. White orchids on every table, walls lined with abstract art, and soft instrumental music humming low in the background. But what struck Sophia most was how everyone addressed her by her first name, and not once did anyone ask about the father. The doctor, an older woman with a calm voice and gentle hands, walked Sophia through every scan, every number. She listened when Sophia asked questions. She smiled when the tiny heartbeat appeared on the monitor, faint, rapid, fluttering like wings behind glass. That was the first moment Sophia felt something real, a life, inside her. When she returned home, Miriam was waiting at the door with a question. "Would you like to have dinner in the garden tonight?" Sophia blinked. "Dinner? With him?" "He requested it," Miriam replied, not unkindly. "He'd like to speak with you." That evening, she dressed in a simple dress from the wardrobe someone had stocked for her and followed the path of flickering lanterns toward the garden. And there he was, Nathaniel Crane, standing near the fountain, sleeves rolled, watching the sky change colors as dusk settled in. When he turned to her, his expression was unreadable, but not unfeeling. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, his voice the first real sound he'd offered her. Sophia sat down across from him, unsure if this was a conversation or the beginning of something else. Or a man known for silence, Nathaniel Crane spoke with surprising clarity. He didn't offer charm or apology. He offered facts, concise, polished, like points on a presentation slide. His parents had died young. He'd been raised in expectation, not affection. He didn't believe in marriage. He didn't believe in love. He simply wanted a child, someone to inherit a name built from logic and labor. Sophia listened, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the stone table. Between them, two untouched plates of food grew cold in the night air. The garden smelled of lemon blossoms, and wind rustled gently through the trees above them. When he finally paused, she asked the only question that mattered. "Why me?" He looked at her then, not through her, not past her, but at her. As if the question struck a nerve he didn't expect to feel. "Because you didn't ask for anything more." Sophia blinked. She had expected a lie or a rehearsed line, but not that. She leaned back slowly, her voice soft but firm. "Maybe I didn't ask because I knew nothing was being offered." Nathaniel's mouth twitched, not a smile, a flicker. Then he rose. "You're free to walk these grounds. You'll have access to any care you need, but I won't interfere unless necessary." "I hope that's acceptable." Sophia nodded, unsure if this was kindness or another wall. He began to walk away, then stopped. "I'll join you at your next appointment," he said, without turning. Before she could reply, he disappeared into the shadows of the house. Left alone, Sophia looked up at the stars above the garden. She was carrying a stranger's child, but somehow that stranger now had a voice. And maybe, just maybe, a crack in the armor he wore so tightly. Days passed, like pages turning slowly in a forgotten book. Sophia began to map the rhythms of the estate. The library, always sunlit by morning. The conservatory, filled with plants she couldn't name. The garden paths that twisted behind high hedges, offering small escapes where no one watched, except sometimes someone did. She would catch glimpses of Nathaniel through distant windows, his figure outlined against office glass, or a shadow disappearing into a corridor. Always composed, always alone. Their next encounter came sooner than expected. On a rainy afternoon, Sophia found herself curled on a velvet bench in the library, reading a children's book she had pulled down without thinking. Her hand instinctively rested over her stomach now, as if protecting something not yet visible. "Do you like that one?" His voice startled her. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, a coffee in hand, his expression unreadable but less guarded than before. She nodded. "It was my brother's favorite. I used to read it to him at night." He walked slowly into the room, then, unexpectedly, sat across from her. "My mother read it to me once." just once. There was a silence that followed. Not awkward, not cold, just space, shared. She didn't ask him more. Instead, she passed the book across the small table. He took it, turned a page as if it weighed more than it should. For the first time, she saw something behind the title. Grief, shaped like memory. "I didn't think you noticed this part of the house," she said softly. "I notice more than people think," he replied. Sophia smiled faintly. "So do I." In that quiet corner of a house built on formality, two strangers sat surrounded by stories, some written, others still unfolding. And in the silence between them, something gentle began to grow. Sophia had always believed that houses had moods. This one, in particular, shifted with the people who walked through it. Some days it was hollow, echoing with polished formality. Other days it felt almost warm, like something waiting to be remembered. On Thursday morning she awoke before the sun. The baby had stirred. Not a kick, not yet, just a flutter, a sense of movement, soft and low, that left her breathless. She pressed her palm gently to her belly, eyes wide in the pre-dawn light. It was real, not a theory, not a transaction, a child, a soul. She didn't know why, but her feet led her down the hallway through corridors she rarely entered. That's when she heard it. A piano, not a recording, not a ghost. Someone was playing, hesitant but tender, a lullaby or something close. She followed the sound until it led her to a study with the door barely cracked open. And there he was, Nathaniel, seated at the piano, bathed in dim morning light, his back to her, unaware. The melody was fragile, a bit off-key, but honest. She stood silently watching, not wanting to interrupt. When he stopped, he sat for a long time with his hands still resting on the keys. Then he spoke, without turning. "How far along are we?" She hesitated, then stepped inside. 14 weeks tomorrow." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I wasn't sure if I'd want to know, but now, I think I do." Sophia said nothing, just approached and sat on the edge of the couch nearby. He glanced at her finally, eyes darker than usual, softer somehow. "Do you think they can hear us even now?" She looked down, smiling gently. "I hope so." For the first time, neither of them needed to explain anything. The music had already said enough. The rhythm of life at the Crane estate began to shift. Dinners became shared. Not frequent, but meaningful. Sometimes in the garden, sometimes in the sunroom with windows cracked open to let in the scent of rain. Always quiet, always without pretense. Nathaniel didn't fill the air with talk. Neither did Sophia, but there was something delicate building, like trust growing in the shadows. One evening she arrived at the dining table to find a note beside her plate. "Your iron levels are low. The chef prepared spinach and lentils." No signature, no need for one. It was a small thing, but it pierced deeper than any grand gesture. Someone was paying attention. She wasn't invisible here, not anymore. In return, Sophia began leaving small traces of herself behind. A bookmark forgotten on a side table, a folded blanket she knew he might need if he ever stayed too long in the library. Neither of them spoke of these things, but both noticed. At her next appointment, Nathaniel sat in the chair beside her without saying much. He watched the ultrasound screen like it held a secret only he could interpret. When the sound of the heartbeat filled the room, he closed his eyes briefly, as if anchoring himself to that rhythm. Outside, as they returned to the car, he surprised her. "Have you thought of names?" Sophia turned to him. "You?" He looked ahead, not meeting her eyes. "Only one." She waited, but he said nothing more. Back at the estate, she found a book left outside her room. A leather-bound baby-named journal, untouched but open to the first page. She smiled, running her fingers over it. They weren't a couple. They weren't a family. But in their own quiet way, they were beginning to dream as if they might become one. The sky turned grey before noon. Clouds hung low over the estate, and thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills. Sophia sat in the conservatory, wrapped in a knit shawl, the baby name book on her lap. Her fingers hovered over the page, pen uncapped, but she hadn't written anything yet. There was something about putting a name on paper that made everything feel irreversible. She looked up as the wind tapped gently at the glass. The storm hadn't started, but it was coming. She felt it in her chest. That evening, the rain arrived. It came down in sheets, slapping the windows and flooding the garden paths. The lights flickered twice before settling. Sophia wandered through the quiet halls, her steps drawn toward the west wing, a part of the house she hadn't explored. She didn't expect to find him there. Nathaniel stood at a wide set of French doors, staring out into the storm. He looked different without his usual armor. No jacket, no tie. Just a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up, jaw set, but distant. "I always hated storms as a child," he said without turning. Sophia stood beside him, silent for a moment. Then softly, "I loved them. They made the world feel honest." He looked at her, surprised, not by her presence, but by the simplicity of her words. "You see beauty in everything, don't you?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I just refuse to let fear decide what I notice." There was a pause. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't planned. It was an instinct. A moment of grounding. She didn't pull away. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating two silhouettes by the door. Inside, something warmer than electricity passed quietly between them. The next morning brought calm skies and a golden wash of light across the estate. The storm had passed, but something in its wake lingered. Sophia felt it in her chest, a quiet ache she couldn't name. Nathaniel wasn't at breakfast. She wandered outside, the garden still damp, birds shaking rain from their feathers. A gardener tipped his hat as she passed. Everyone here knew not to ask questions. Perhaps that was why it felt safe. Inside, she found herself at the base of the east staircase. There was a door she had noticed before, always locked, always still. Today it was ajar. Curiosity pulled her forward. The room was dim, untouched. Dust lay in soft layers over everything. A child's mobile hung above a crib that had long since been folded and stored. Paintings on the wall, unfinished. A rocking chair, still in the corner. Sophia stepped inside. She knew instantly what it was. Grief lived here, not in the objects, but in the air. In the way, light refused to settle on anything for too long. She didn't touch anything, only stood in silence. That's when she heard his voice behind her. "No one's been in this room for 5 years." She turned to face Nathaniel. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes gave him away. "Your child?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Stillborn, 2 weeks before due." She stepped toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And the mother?" She left, couldn't take the silence. They stood in that space neither of them had prepared for. Then, quietly, Sophia reached for his hand again. Not because he needed comfort, but because she refused to let him stand in that room alone. For a man who had built walls of marble, the touch of her fingers cracked through them like sunlight through shutters. After that morning, something shifted between them. Not abruptly, like a revelation, but slowly, like a window that had been left open just a crack, letting in fresh air no one realized they needed. Sophia didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. But she began leaving traces of care in places grief had once claimed. She brought fresh flowers to the forgotten room, not every day, just once, carefully placed where the sun hit in the afternoon. Nathaniel never commented, but one morning, the flowers were changed by someone else's hand. In return, he began appearing more often, not just in the library or study, but beside her, at meals, on walks through the orchard paths, always close, always quiet. One evening, they found themselves in the kitchen, far from the formal dining room, eating soup beside the hearth. Sophia laughed at something she read aloud from a newspaper column. Nathaniel smiled, a real smile, the kind that starts in the eyes and softens the edges of a man who has known too much silence. She noticed the way his hand brushed hers when he reached for salt, and he didn't pull back. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She wandered the halls and ended up in the nursery again. Not the old one, but the new room being prepared. Paintings leaned against the walls. A bassinet had arrived, not ordered by her and not from the agency. Nathaniel had made the space ready. For someone. For something real. She ran her hands across the smooth edge of the cradle and whispered to herself, "You're not alone here anymore." Behind her, he stood quietly in the doorway. "I don't want you to leave after the birth," he said. Her breath caught, and for the first time,